Good morning. I'm Harley Schlanger from the LaRouche Organization with your daily video update for May 26th, 2023. Today I'm going to be taking your questions. I have three very interesting questions that can bring us right to the heart of some of the leading developments that are taking place. So let's begin. The first one, what is the significance of Russian Prime Minister Mishustin's trip to Beijing? Well, the Prime Minister was in Beijing for 2 days or 3 days perhaps, and the major purpose was to reaffirm the partnership. And this is quite significant because there's all this speculation in the West about what would happen if there's a two-front war, why it would be better to break Russia from China or China from Russia before that, and speculation on is China using Russia, is Russia using China? And what you see is the cynicism of the Western thinking, which fails to recognize that there are mutual reasons for each nation to work with each other. And it's not just military. The partnership is primarily on joint economic development. Russia and China are partners in the BRICS, the Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa alliance, which now has up to 30 other nations wishing to join, and the reaffirmation of the BRICS Development Bank as a major source of credit. There's also the whole expansion of Russia-Chinese trade, which is largely done in yuan to ruble, that is outside of the dollar. There were 1,200 Russian entrepreneurs who went with Mishustin to Beijing. They engaged in major discussions on joint projects, including especially energy deals, that include the Russia-Kazakhstan-China pipeline, oil pipeline, other kinds of energy projects, and also food trade. Russia has raw materials, they have good soil, they have fertilizer development, and so on. So there's a lot of reason for a partnership there beyond merely the opposition to the Western imperial policy. But that is crucial, that the two countries are aligned against the idea of a unipolar order and are looking at how to create a different multilateral order in which sovereign nations are able to cooperate for mutual development, as opposed to a rules-based order in which one power dictates the terms. They also are committed to the idea of economic sovereignty. That is, of each nation choosing its own way of developing, which of course goes against Blinken and the so-called rules-based order. Now, at the same time, Xi Jinping addressed the Eurasian Economic Forum, which was occurring on the same 2 days that Mishustin was in Beijing. And this was another opportunity which Putin addressed about the change in the world financial system. So this is moving very rapidly. Now, one aspect of this is that the Russian-Chinese trade was up almost 40% for the first 2 months of 2023 over the first 2 months of 2022. So this has been very important in consolidating the relationship. But this goes back, some people say, well, Russia and China came together because of the Ukraine situation. Well, there was the February 4th, 2022 meeting of Putin and Xi, but they've met more than 30 times. They've repeatedly emphasized the importance of a strategic partnership. So this is not totally related to the Ukraine war, although the Ukraine war gave more impetus to it because of the recognition that the West is not only out to destroy Russia, as has been admitted by Western leaders, but also to stop the Chinese. Stop the Chinese from what? Economic development, from participating and helping other nations develop. So there's a common interest in the two nations. And this is part of the reason why the anti-Russian sanctions have failed, partly because of the trade with China, but also because the rest of the global South is not willing to go along with these sanctions. So I would say that's the significance of this meeting the last couple of days, and this is going to continue to develop and deepen a partnership. Now, the second question, how solid is the coalition government in Germany? Many of you are wondering, how the hell can this government stay in office when its poll numbers are dropping? The economy is in a shambles in Germany. They're already talking about a catastrophic energy shortage for next winter. And the current government has no clue what to do except to go along with the demands of NATO and the NATO dominant partners, the British and the United States. So if you look at it on the surface, the Social Democrats of Olaf Scholz, the Green Party of Baerbock and Habeck, and the FDP, the so-called Liberal Party, their poll numbers are dropping. The latest polls show that they're around 40% for the three parties together. That's well under half of the German population. And this reflects, on the one hand, opposition to the war because this government is totally pro-war, opposition to money going to Ukraine when there's not money for upgrading German infrastructure, for protecting German business, when the green policy is destroying the Mittelstand, that is the medium and small enterprises that are key in terms of machine tool development, auto sector, and so on. And the fact that the German government did nothing about the destruction of the North Sea pipelines, which was, according to Seymour Hersh, done by the United States. Instead, Scholz was there with Biden, has had several meetings with Biden, and as far as we know, not once was it raised in their meetings. Perhaps Scholz knew, or did he not know? Why won't the German government investigate? So this plays into the growing opposition. But now there's a very interesting scandal developing around Robert Habeck, the economic minister, who has a woman named Elga Bartsch as the head of the economic policy division of his economic ministry. Now, most Germans have never heard of her, but we're putting out a dossier on her now. She came to the economics ministry from BlackRock, the world's largest trading company, a company that's very much in the middle of the military-industrial complex in the United States, is buying up land in Ukraine, is buying up housing all over the world. But prior to BlackRock, she was at Morgan Stanley. Now, this is where it gets interesting. In 2007, she authored a paper called The Economics of Climate Change. This is in 2007. One of the chapters was titled Another Dose of Creative Destruction. And what she was writing about is how you have to destroy the existing economy in order to have climate change accepted, the climate change policies accepted. So she writes about how do you implement the policies to combat climate change when most people don't agree necessarily, and certainly don't know what she says she knows about the danger of climate change. So she writes, quote, "You need top-down technological change heavily influenced by government policies," unquote. And later she goes on to say that this will, quote, "require the most far-reaching government intervention," unquote. Now, that's obviously the case because most people don't want to give up their automobiles in Germany, but the German government is trying to make it mandatory that by some point in the future, they tried 2035, maybe they're going to push it back a little bit, but by 2035, no more internal combustion engines in Germany, all electric, even though they haven't figured out how to solve the battery problem, the recharge problem, and so on. Furthermore, the green policies are deindustrializing the country. What's going to replace the auto sector, the machine tool sector, the steel sector? What's going to replace the trading with Russia and China, which the Green Party is opposed to continuing economic relations? They want full economic decoupling. Now, when you look at this 2007 report, what you see is that it's an outline in advance of what today is known as the Green New Deal and the Great Reset. That is top-down control of governments by corporate cartels committed to deindustrializing, reducing population, and establishing a global bankers' dictatorship. This is now being imposed by the SPD, Green, FDP coalition government on the German population. Now, note the timing of this. In 2007, when she wrote this paper, it was right before the blowout of the markets, which included the mortgage-backed security holdings of her bank, Morgan Stanley. When the 2008 crisis hit, when the bubble popped, Morgan Stanley got $9 billion from Mitsubishi and $20 billion from the Troubled Asset Relief Program called TARP. So that's $29 billion to bail out the bank that she was writing for and committing to a green policy. What's the hidden message here? The green policy was to create a new bubble, whether it's carbon credits, whether it's investment in technologies to replace fossil fuels, nuclear, and so on. It's the attempt to create a new bubble to keep the banks profitable even as the economy collapses. And this is exactly what Biden's Green New Deal is. This is exactly what the European Union Green Deal is. And this is what's being rejected by the nations of the global South. So we'll see what happens with the coalition government here. I would argue that it's going to probably take a significant defeat in the Ukraine war before people start jumping up and down saying, why are we doing this? And we'll see. But there's definitely unrest in Germany, France, Italy, and other countries. Now, finally, several of you wrote about the potential impact of the Robert F. Kennedy Jr. campaign, especially his insistence on reopening the JFK assassination, the question of the cover-up of who did it, and his charge that the CIA was involved in it, which is entirely legitimate charge. But most important, why was this never discussed? The fact that a member of the Kennedy family, who's now a senior member of the Kennedy family, is bringing it up, opens the potential to discuss what was behind the assassination of President Kennedy in November 1963. And we'll be involved in a conference on this coming up because of the importance of the June 10th, 1963 speech at American University by President Kennedy, in which he outlined a peace plan between the US and the Soviets, which completely went against the war hawks in his own cabinet and during the whole Cold War period. So raising this is a crucial opportunity to look at the question of the Kennedy assassination. But it must not be limited just to the Kennedy assassination. We've already written about what we call an International Assassination Bureau, which was in operation during the 1960s, even before that. But it included the recruitment of Nazis after World War II by Allen Dulles, by West German intelligence, including people like the Stefan Bandera, who's the great hero to the neo-Nazis in the Ukrainian Defense and Security Forces, which will be important, you'll see in a moment. But look at the assassinations that occurred at the same time as the JFK assassination. You had John F. Kennedy and Robert F. Kennedy in 1968, RFK. You had Malcolm X and Martin Luther King. Internationally, you had Patrice Lumumba of the Democratic Republic of Congo and Enrico Mattei of the Italian National Oil Company, whose plane was sabotaged. And at the same time, there were multiple assassination attempts against Charles de Gaulle. What did these have in common? They were efforts to sustain the power that was being accrued by the United States and the British as a coalition, as part of the division of the empires, the Warsaw Pact on the one side, NATO on the other. This terror continued in the 1970s, waves of assassinations in the 70s, including the Prime Minister of Italy, Aldo Moro, run through something called Operation Gladio, which was a assassination unit set up within NATO. Now, today we're seeing regime change and assassination again. In the most recent period, the war against Iraq and the judicial murder of Saddam Hussein, the murder of Muammar Gaddafi, the use of war to redraw boundaries. You know, when they say, well, you can't allow boundaries to be redrawn in Ukraine, what about Yugoslavia, which was done by NATO? You can't affect the sovereignty of other nations. Well, what about the U.S. in Syria? They're not invited to be there, but the United States is holding almost 1/3 of the territory of Syria, interestingly, where the oil is. So we see a hypocrisy here, but the use of assassination as part of color revolution regime change. Now, on this, there's a very interesting new development, which is that there's a threat from Kiev's military intelligence directorate that say they have the right to kill Russians. That's right, the right to kill Russians. They have kill lists. But at the top of the kill list now, according to the deputy head of that agency, is Vladimir Putin. So they're openly stating that they intend to kill the Russian president. And of course, just a few weeks ago, there was a drone attack on the Kremlin. We're going to be discussing this in detail on Saturday's Manhattan Project program with a couple of my associates from Cliff Kirikoff and Jacques Cheminade from France. Will be discussing with Dennis Speed the International Assassination Bureau and the importance of raising this in the context of what John Kennedy was trying to do to break out of the imperial policy control in 1963. So I'll have a link for the Manhattan Project program at the bottom of the description page. It'll be available tomorrow, and the event is at 2 p.m. Eastern Time in the United States. And I hope you'll join us because this will cover very in-depth and thoroughly the charge that the CIA, as part of a group of agencies internationally, was involved in using assassination as an instrument of policy change. So thanks for joining me. Join us again tomorrow, and I'll see you again next week. Hello, thanks for watching. Be sure to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss any of our videos. Support our independence to produce videos like these. Become a member of the LaRouche organization at thelarouche.org/member. By becoming a member for $25 or more, you'll get special access to the EIR Alert Daily Briefing and Weekly Magazine, which is what I read to stay on top of things.